Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm your host, Corey Graham. Join us here every Friday night at 8 p.m. or listen anytime via podcast at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, to name just a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where the independent new authors come first. I'm looking at a book now. It's a gripping tale of power, conflict, and spiritual realms. It's titled Evil Seed, Book 3, and it's written by Robbie Kesselring. And we're going to talk all about this. Robbie is here with me now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. Robbie, welcome to the show. I appreciate you joining me here tonight.
Thank you, Corey. Good to be here.
So, Robbie, could you tell us all about Evil Seed? Could you catch us up maybe a little bit on maybe what you covered in books 1 and 2, and then tell us what happens here now in book 3?
Yes, sir. It starts out with a construction of a city in space. It follows a main character, Roderick Claiborne, as he gets gifted to do wonderful things for the city and for people. He's just a regular guy, and he kind of gets empowered to do some extraordinary things. But he still lives as a regular guy, finds a wife, eventually has a family, goes from the city in space back to Earth. He has really a home on each city. And there are creatures in space that he wasn't aware of, places in the planets, moons, and stars that he's required to visit. That's kind of where the adventure goes.
Robbie, what sort of a reading audience do you think would be into this the most?
I think the first couple books go for someone above the age of 12. The second book, The Garden of Neom, is a little more intense. By the way, this city in space is called Purgatory, and that's the name of the first book. The third book, Evil Seed, is about a 12-year-old girl and two young boys who, during the story, throughout the book, they grow several years in age, young teenagers, and kind of just follows their lives and their extraordinary events that they find both on Earth and in planets in space.
So, Robbie, what was your inspiration for this? Where'd you get the idea for the story?
That's a good question. I love movies. I love stories. I'm a little bit fascinated by the planets and the stars and the universe and how big it is, and came across some of the different planets with designations from NASA, and some of those were pretty interesting, so those were incorporated into the story. But just what is out there besides us, at what point do we get to experience all that?
Once you sat down, started writing Evil Seed, was this a long process for you?
Process of writing, the long part is getting yourself in a place where, for me anyway, less distractions, kind of at peace with everything, time, and then just being able to sit down and let it flow. So once I get to that elusive state of mind, it goes fairly quickly. The third book a little longer because life just gave me a lot of really pleasant distractions, and so it was a little tougher to kind of wrap that one up. But so I can't really give you a time per se, but the majority of time is getting ready to write a book.
And once you have your manuscript ready, you hand it off to the publisher, and you start that whole process. So what did you find the most challenging part about that publishing end of things?
Takes a long time. That's a hard part. I tell you what, I never realized how impatient I was until I read my books. They kind of flow nice. They kind of, there's no dead spots and there's no boring spots. And then also realize that when you turn it into the publisher, there's a process and you're approving things and it all takes time. So that's a tough one, especially if you've got, like my books, some tech in the books, and tech changes so quickly and advances so fastly that's a little tough too. So that's the challenging part.
So looking ahead, is there another book on the way in this series, do you think?
Certainly would love to. I have some of the story in my head, I guess, right now. If my circumstance in life allows me to have the time and the sort of peace and sort of the focus, then yeah, I'd love to.
Is writer's block, things like that, ever something that's a challenge for you?
That's a good question, because when I'm writing a story, I just kind of sit down and write. And some days go, pretty good. Some days you're just sort of thinking. As far as real writer's block, not for any length of time.
Well, this definitely sounds like a story I think a lot of readers will be into. Again, the title of the book is Evil Seed, Book 3. It's written by Robbie Kesselring, and it's published by Christian Faith Publishing. So go to places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes or traditional brick-and-mortar stores. You'll be able to pick it up. Robbie, really appreciate you coming on the show and talking with me here tonight. Thanks again.
Thank you, Corey. It's been good.
I'm looking at a book right now that's an exploration of forgiveness and healing. It's written by Jerry Thomas, entitled Father Forgive, Breaking the Chains. Jerry is right here with me now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, and that's what we're going to be talking all about. Jerry, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Jerry, can you tell me what you've written about in Father Forgive?
I'm a novelist. That's all I write is novels, and I love it. I love to write stories. But Father Forgive, Breaking the Chains is a story full of characters that I've created that play out the roles that reflect many of our real-life scenarios. Characters in this story are very interestingly woven together throughout this in-depth story to kind of demonstrate outcomes that may easily be applied to our own life circumstances. The story does dive headfirst right into the realization of not only what true forgiveness looks like, but the benefit of living that out for life. Also, it does recognize what unforgiveness really looks like as well and its consequences. But most importantly, the story tells of how we can, with God's help, truly forgive. That's a difficult topic sometimes, and you get down deep into it. But to learn how to truly forgive and to be forgiven, and that's the biggest one. Father Forgive is a story that basically reflects real life's conditions, good and bad times, seemingly impossible situations that need to be solved, and relationships that most of us will relate with. But I think I want to touch on the point of unforgiveness. In recent years, I have seen more and more people who struggle severely with unforgiveness of themselves. We hear a lot of stories about people who can't forgive because, or what somebody else did or didn't do. But so often we hear people say, or I hear people say, well, I've forgiven them, but I can't forget. Or I've forgiven them, but I won't ever, and it just goes on. The truth is, unforgiveness is unforgiveness. Whether you say you've forgiven them and won't forget it or not, it's unforgiveness. And that hurt just continues on. I've had a great time piecing these characters together to form a wonderful story of the pain of unforgiveness being healed.
Jerry, what sort of readers did you have in mind when you were working on this?
Initially, when I started to write the book, I had in mind a certain reader that might want this book, but eventually I changed. I'm interested in anyone who struggles even minutely with being forgiven or unforgiveness in any way. Like I just alluded to a moment ago, being unable to forgive is a killer, and it won't stop until you finally learn how we can truly forgive. The real problem I see is unforgiveness of ourselves. I kind of alluded to that a moment ago, but true forgiveness, if somebody can get there from here, and you can, will set them free. It'll help them to realize that forgiving someone is actually easier than it sounds like to do. And God's called us to do that. He's forgiven us, and it's really easier than it sounds.
Once you got started on Father Forgive, Jerry, was this a long journey for you, the writing, the publishing, everything?
All told, I suppose I have about a little over a year in writing it, and about another 6 to 8 months in the publication process.
When you finally get your first copy in, you're holding it for the first time, Jerry, what's that moment like?
That's an interesting point, because I remember that. I remember the box came to my front door, and of course I knew what it was. And I opened it up, and I pulled it out, and holding in my hand, what I had done. And I'll be honest with you, the first thought that went through my mind is, praise God. Praise God for this. Everything is for good. But right after that, there was that wonderful feeling of accomplishment. Not so much, look what I did, but look what was done. And it just is a wonderful feeling of accomplishment, yeah.
Well, forgiveness, I love it. This is definitely a message that we need to hear. Again, the book is titled Father Forgive, Breaking the Chains. It's written by Jerry Thomas, published by Christian Faith Publishing. So you can find it at places like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Jerry, it's been really great having you on the show and learning about Father Forgive. Thanks again.
Well, thank you so much for the interview. You have a great day.
I'm looking at a new book. It's a journey of friendship and adventure. It's written by L.A. Holden, and it's titled The Adventures of Francois, Francois and the Pawpaw Tree. The author, Annette, is right here with me now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, and we get to talk all about this book. Annette, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm curious about the adventures of Francois. What can readers find here, Annette?
I was raised on a farm, and so Francois is having the adventures that my brother and I had when we were growing up. I just placed him in a different country, and it just totally changed the whole scenario, but he's having our adventures.
And what sorts of readers did you have in mind for this?
Kiddos, 4 to 8, I think would probably get the most out of the book. They can read it for themselves at that age pretty much, except for a few words, and I think it just inspire them to have adventures. And I had one little girl give me some feedback. She was 8. She appreciated the fact that Francois didn't like all the rules. That his She said, yeah, how can you have adventures with all those rules?
I love it. So what was that spark in that? What made you decide to sit down and get started on this?
At the time I wrote it, I was sick in the bed and just couldn't do anything else. And all of a sudden, the story just came to me, and I had my husband write it down for me. And I thought, well, shucks, that's a cute little story. So I decided to work on trying to have it published.
Is this your first time at doing something like this, or do you have some experience in it?
I've had one other book published. It was The Boy No One Noticed, and it's about a little boy in China. But The Adventures of Francois is the first of 6 that I've had published regarding Francois. So he's got lots of adventures coming. Was this a long process for you once you got started, clear up through when it was published and ready to go out there? Yes, only because publishers want someone with experience. They don't want to give you a shot, out the door that, well, we want somebody that's had experience. And really, it took years to get the first book published. And then after it was published, the publisher that published this book called me and asked me if I would be interested in publishing a book for them. And I thought, okay, somebody noticed that I had done one. So that made the whole thing so much sweeter.
And then that day finally came. You get the first copy in. You get to hold this. It's a real thing. What's that moment like? It's absolutely surreal. It's like, what? I took a picture. I took a selfie, put it on Facebook. I'm 2,000 miles away from where I went to school and everything. And all of my high school buddies said, okay, we want to sign the copy. It was fun. I still have to pinch myself. Now, something that's really important in books like this often are the illustrations. So was that a difficult thing for you to get pinned down? Well, I had a team of illustrators that did the illustrations for me, but I had a hard time getting them to understand what a pawpaw tree looked like. We had to go through 2 or 3 rejects there before, and it still didn't get it like it looks like, because it is a real tree. But I thought, well, probably one out of a million kids that read this will ever see a pawpaw tree anyway. They're so rare. So it's just close enough. It's not going to do. But that was really the only thing, was the pawpaw tree. They kept wanting to make it look like a papaya tree. I said, no, it's not a tropical papaya tree. So a lot of our listeners right now are aspiring authors. So, Annette, is there any advice that you might have for them? Yes, it's don't give up. I was turned down by, I don't know how many publishing houses. I just had faith in my story, and I was determined to have it published, and I just kept on and kept on. And I'd get those reject letters, and I think, you just don't know what a good story is. I love it. I just kept trying. Well, it happens to so many of us authors a lot of times. It's the most frustrating thing. It's writer's block. Annette, do you ever have to deal with that? I haven't so far. Once I got started with Francois, I just wrote the heck out of that. Oh, I love that this is a book that's going to inspire adventure in children. I definitely recommend, if you're listening right now, go check this out. Again, it's titled The Adventures of Francois, Francois and the Pawpaw Tree. This is written by L.A. Holden and published by Hawes & Jenkins Publishing, so get it at places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, or walk right down the street to your local bookshop and you'll find it there too. Well, Ned, it's been really nice talking with you tonight. Thank you so much for coming on the show with me. I appreciate you having me, and it's been a joy. I can't talk enough about my little books. The book I'm looking at right now is a tale that follows one woman's rediscovery of her life after death through Christ. The name of the book is My Lazarus Life, a true story based on the life, death, and life of Teresa Rose Earp. The writer is Richard Parnes, and we're going to talk all about this book. Richard is right here with me. Richard, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to speak with you. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your time, Richard. Can you tell me all about My Lazarus Life and what readers can expect here?
The readers can expect an actual journey of a woman who died 3 times due to lung problems. The original was called coccidioidomycosis. She was on the operating table and died for a full 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Wow.
Jesus Christ met her, took her to heaven, purgatory, and hell, showed her the wonders of heaven and, unfortunately, the faults of being in purgatory and then hell. But she was given the choice to come back, or the chance to come back and prove that you should pray often and listen to Jesus Christ and follow through only in the words of Jesus Christ. And she is doing that today.
Richard, what sorts of readers did you have in mind for this?
Well, believe it or not, according to Jesus Christ and Teresa, all believers and all non-believers are the ones that Jesus is reaching out to, which means almost everybody. Christians, non-Christians, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, everybody needs to believe in Jesus Christ, because in order to get to heaven, you're going to have to go and answer the question, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And the answer has to be yes. If you don't, unfortunately, you may not get to heaven.
Richard, how did the idea for this come about? What was that spark?
It was an interesting conversation when I first met a man named Gregory Bain, who I met at a Bible study, a men's Bible study. He says, you have to stop everything you're doing because I heard you're a writer and you need to speak to this woman. And I said, why would I speak to the woman when I had never even met her? And I honestly did not write nonfiction at the time. It was only fiction. But she approached me a week later and said, Jesus says you are the one to write my book. And I politely said, I'm sorry, but I don't even know who you are. And she explained to me what was going on, that she was looking for somebody for 30 years to write her book. Ironically, we followed in the same path for over 40 years, growing up in New York, Long Island, and then moving out to California. And I've been to almost every place she had been. And she said, Jesus says you have to write it. So I said to her, well, who am I to say no to Jesus? And I did write it.
So how long of a journey was this for you once you sat down, started on it, clear up through when it was published and ready to go out there?
The journey took a little over a year. I wrote every day, and we met at a wonderful diner that we ate, and I took all the notes. And it took from September of last year through November 24th, when it actually became published. I was writing feverishly. I had never at that time written so many pages or so much in such a short time. A full 8 months of writing, 6 months of editing, and final printing.
Yeah, there's a lot to be done in that publishing process. Richard, what did you find the most challenging part of that for you?
In the publishing process, the most challenging to me, to be honest with you, is waiting. Because I'm ready to, and I'm wanting to see this thing in print. But obviously, clarifications and dictatorial corrections need to be made, as much as sentence structure that I may not be 100% positive. So it took between 4 and 5 different editorial processes before we got it right and able to say, okay, let's go, let's move forward.
And then the day finally came and it was all done. It's in your hands, that first copy. It's the finished product, Richard. What was that moment like?
Oh, God, it was so wonderful. I was so impressed with the final product, the pictures that Teresa gave me. And I had this idea how it should be on the front cover with the 3 times that Teresa had actually died at the 3 different ages. And I saw this picture in my mind when I was sleeping, because I hear words being spoken to me when I sleep and I have to get up. And I found the picture of Jesus calling Lazarus from the tomb that he was at, all bandaged. And then I knew that the 3 different pictures of Teresa had to be on the front cover.
Again, the title is My Lazarus Life, a true story based on the life, death, and life of Teresa Rose Earp. This is written by Richard Parnes and published by Covenant Books. So find it everywhere, really, like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also at traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Richard, thank you again for coming on the show with me and telling me all about this. I really had a good time.
Thank you so much, Corey, again, for giving me the opportunity. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
We went as boys. We came back as old men. That's the name of the new book. It just came out. It's written by Sergeant Dennis Urban. And that's what we're going to be talking all about right now here at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. Dennis is here with me. Dennis, welcome to the show. I appreciate you joining me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dennis, can you tell me all about We Went as Boys, We Came Back as Old Men, and what you've written about here?
Okay, I was stationed in the Republic of South Korea in February of 1968 through March of 1969. I spent 5.5 months in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, and another 2.5 months on the Imjin River Guard Post. I drew a total of 8 months of combat pay while I was in the country, and I got into a number of incidences that were never reported with North Korean infiltrators, as well as many other soldiers did in the same time period and before and even afterwards. What I tried to do was put together a book that would not only be my story, but the story of many, many soldiers who had served over 20, 30 years total time frame, to give the American public and to give the South Korean public an idea of what it was to be a soldier inside the DMZ itself. Myself, my specialty was patrolling, so my first 4 months, I pretty much spent the entire time living inside the DMZ, doing patrols, doing night ambushes, and eating a lot of 15-year-old sea rations. We patrolled during daylight, and we did daylight observation. As soon as it got dark, after dark, we would move to a night ambush position. We would quickly set up a night ambush, and then we would wait for any North Korean infiltrators that were either in training, actually coming through the DMZ to get through the fence, or we didn't want to meet up with were their hunter killer squads. The hunter killer squads were a 5-man team of highly trained North Korean soldiers whose only mission was to find and kill the American patrols. When they did, they not only killed the men, they took whatever equipment they had with them, including their uniforms and their boots and their steel pots, because this they would later use when they tried to infiltrate into South Korea and make attacks. In the end of January of 1968, there was an incident where the USS Pueblo, a Navy spy ship, was hijacked in the open seas by the North Koreans. Shortly after that, there was an incident where 31 North Korean officers penetrated the fence, got all the way down to the guard positions around the presidential palace, which was called the Blue House, similar to our White House. Local policemen stopped a group of these infiltrators dressed as Korean soldiers and asked them what they were doing, and he wasn't satisfied with their answer, and he looked at their boots and realized these were not Army-issue boots, and at that time he was murdered on the spot. That became a gun battle while the North Korean infiltrators headed back to North Korea. After a few weeks, one Korean infiltrator made it back. One was captured alive, and 29 others were killed. A number of U.S. troops, South Korean troops, and a lot of civilians died in the process. When we were in the DMZ, our incidences weren't always reported. For an incident to be reported, an incident is an interaction with North Korean soldiers. They were supposed to stay north of the middle line of the DMZ. We were supposed to stay south. Nobody was to have automatics. We had semi-automatics. They had fully automatic machine guns. They constantly came through the DMZ. They were trying their best to stir up a revolt in South Korea against the government and against the U.S. forces that were there to protect South Korea. Not many made it through, but the ones that did were very effective. Our job for the American soldiers with our Korean attachments, which were called KATUSAs, Korean augmentation to the United States Army, our job was to try to stop these either in the DMZ itself or at the barrier that was built in 1968, the barrier fence.
Well, what an amazing book. Again, this is titled, We Went as Boys, We Came Back as Old Men. It was written by Sergeant Dennis Urban and published by Newman Springs Publishing, so really you can get it everywhere, like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Dennis, thank you again for coming on the show and telling me all about your story and about what you've written here. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your call.
I'm looking at the new book written by Stone White. It's titled Back to the Loo, in the Mind. And Stone is right here with me now, and we're going to talk all about this book. Stone, welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Absolutely. Stone, can you tell me all about Back to the Loo, in the Mind, and what readers are going to get into here?
Here is another book from the Daily Trials of Stone White, a companion piece to 8 years earlier trip in St. Louis. 156 days in a row of my life beginning in Seattle. Then it's back to the loo for Stone White. More pain, beer, benzos, arguments, movies, music, and more beer. The whole effing day. I'm an artist who doses and tries his ass off at whatever art form he is projecting out into the world abyss.
Stone, who was your target reading audience here? Who do you think would be most into this?
Me, God, and humanity. Animals, I don't know if animals too. I have a next door neighbor that has this dog that feeds cheese and meat too. It's boxless. The beer and the benzos rot because it keeps me calm. So what's the next question?
How did you get the idea for this book, Stone? How did it come about?
Well, Stone White was born a bit freakish to begin with. When my mom was pregnant at 6 months, my dad was still having sex with her, and it was not advised. She went to the hospital, and she was on bed rest for a week. My dad was so nice. I mean, back in the cable days, I'm 50 years old now. I was 48 when I wrote the book. And anyways, I stayed in my mom's stomach for an extra 3 months and I was born. Then in the book, it could be nothing but that.
So before this, have you written or published before? What's your writing background look like, Stone?
Oh, God, it goes crazy. It goes on my whole life. Something in St. Louis I wrote when I was like 39 or 40, and I wrote a movie in McCloy North. That's where I went to high school in North County, St. Louis, the suburbs. Anyways, Page Publishing, New York was interested. I was broke. I'm an actor. I'm an actor. I'm a writer, a musician, and it keeps me broke. I hate to say it. If you want to be me, rethink.
So once you got started on this, Stone, how long of a process was this for you?
It took me about a year because every day I document. I document day by day by day. I don't miss one day. I don't miss one single day. And it's about travel. It's about way of life. It's about what do they want out of me. And thing is, I guess my life and my art, I hope.
What's that moment like for you whenever you finally get to hold the first copy of your book and it's a real thing for that first time? What's that like, Stone?
It's about time. It's taken me time, about 50 years old. That's how I feel. It's about time.
And now you're officially a published author, so when you think about that, what's the most rewarding aspect of it for you?
It's validating my existence. I was in 10 Things I Hate About You. I was in Rat Race. I was in Hallmark Hall of Fame. I was playing on the hit rock station in St. Louis. I want to validate and make my life valuable.
So when you are writing, Stone, is writer's block ever something that you have to deal with?
No, it's just piece cake. I just crawl up and do it. It's fun. It's fun. It's an exercise I enjoy doing. I have no drugs in me. When I crawl out of bed, I'm drug-free.
So when you think about the publishing process, whenever you handed that manuscript off to Newman Springs and you started all of that, what was the most challenging part of all of that for you?
Getting through the phone call that says we want to work together. You see, understand, I'm green, and nobody knows who the hell I am. But we're working on that one right now.
Well, again, the name of this book is Back to the Loo, in the Mind. It's written by Stone White and published by Newman Springs Publishing, so you can find it at places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Well, Stone, thank you again for coming on the show and talking to me all about Back to the Loo, in the Mind. It was really great having you.
Thank you for having me tonight.
I'm looking at a new book. It's a memoir that details the author's life. It's written by Suzanne Seach, and it's titled A Hard Hat in Hell. Suzanne is right here with me now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, and we get to talk all about this book. Suzanne, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Suzanne, can you tell me all about A Hard Hat in Hell and what you've written about here?
Yes, A Hard Hat in Hell is a documentary of my life as a union laborer and then 25 years as a union crane operator. And all that entails is being the sole woman on a mostly male workforce.
What sorts of readers did you have in mind when you were working on this?
The readers I have in mind are women who are interested in building and construction, don't know how to get into it. It's also a big lesson in men's behavior and how to deal with that. It's a support system for women in abusive relationships, as I was in one for 16 years and barely survived with my life. Wow. So it is a support system for that. Oh, it's also a little love story because that's how I met my present husband.
So what sparked this idea? What gave you the idea to sit down and start writing this and then get it published?
Yeah, the idea of it, well, let's see, we've got How to Think Like a Man out there. That sort of thing got me going. Why not help women how to learn how to deal with working with men in situations maybe they don't want to, how to understand their behaviors. So that's kind of what got me going on it. Also, because the abusive relationship, the more it's kept secret, it's not helping anyone. So that's why I say it's a support system for other women to learn they can move forward and better their lives.
So do you have experience in this whole thing, writing and publishing, or are you fairly new to all this?
No, I've never done it before. I do read a lot. I read out of about 12 books a day. So I'm a big reader, always have been.
So was this a long journey for you since it was your first one? And I'm sure there was a lot of things that you were learning.
Oh, yeah. This took me 10 years. It took 2 years for all the notes. I would remember something on a job site, how I felt, and I'd immediately write it down on a piece of paper. So I had all these little notes to get together, put them in order, and then also the last 2 years was just horrific because it was editing back, forth with the editor. Every time I got the book back, there were mistakes. So I just had to learn to live with imperfection in some areas, grammatical mostly.
There is nothing like finally getting that finished product. So that day you were finally holding the first copy of A Hard Hat in Hell in your hand, Suzanne. What was that like for you?
I felt astonishment. I felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders because I had a lot of things to write about, a lot of things to exorcise, demons, if you will, especially about the abusive aspects that are written in the book.
And now it's official. You're a published author. Your work's out there for the world. So when you think about that, Suzanne, what's the most rewarding part of it for you?
The most rewarding part is I'm hoping to help other women. I think other women will read it and find something within themselves, whether it be a creative aspect or maybe hope if they're in an abusive relationship. And also women have always asked me, how do you get in construction? It's super interesting to watch a structure being built. It's like a giant puzzle from beginning to end, and to know that you've put your time into that, you made that. When I drive by many buildings in the Milwaukee area and bridges, I have built those. In fact, our giant stadium in the middle of Milwaukee, I put the pile in the ground for that. Oh, wow. Our art museum, things like that you see, and then you just feel good about it. It's like monuments. You're building monuments of your life.
So looking ahead, what would you say the chances are that we'll be seeing more from you here in the future?
Well, very good. The original book came in at over 1,000 pages, if you can imagine.
Oh, wow.
I had a hell of a lot to say. I've worked on thousands of job sites. There's all kinds of tales, funny, humorous, learning from terrible situations. So I have the rest of the book. I had to narrow it down to these 400-something pages. The rest of the book I'm putting together presently. Going through the parts that weren't in this book will be in the next book.
Wonderful. This book is titled A Hard Hat in Hell. It's written by Suzanne Seach and published by Newman Springs Publishing. So find it everywhere, places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also traditional brick and mortar stores. Suzanne, it's been wonderful talking with you today. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. It's been nice talking to you, and thank you for having me.
Joining me right now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable is author Dave, the prayer guy, Roderick. Dave, it's great to be talking with you today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Dave, congratulations. You have a new book out titled Fueling God's Mission with Prayer. Dave, can you tell me all about it? What are readers going to be getting into here?
Well, they're going to get into a little bit of God's mission. I talk about the Great Commission from Matthew and then Acts 1:8. And then I talk about really just encouraging people to use that as a filter and a lens for how we're praying. Whatever we're praying for people to be saved, for disciples to grow closer to Jesus. And so they're going to get some practical advice. They're going to get some scriptures to look at and to think about. And then they're also going to get a chance to maybe even grow closer to Jesus themselves.
Would you say your target audience for this was the general believing audience?
Yes. Especially those that, really love prayer and those that really love his mission of discipleship and evangelism.
So how did this all come about, Dave? What inspired you to write this?
Well, it's been a long process. I think it really started when I was working for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship here in the state of Maine. It really was asking people to pray as a way to fuel God's mission to the campus. And then from there, as I really learned about what God's mission really is, that it's both helping people to be saved and helping people grow. And I'm like, yeah, I would really want to write a book about this and really flesh it out, what God's been developing me all these years, and just share it with the world.
Have you ever done anything like this before?
This is the second book that I published, but this is the first time I've actually wrote a nonfiction, really wanting to really just teach people a different way of thinking about prayer, kind of a new framework.
So once you got started on it, did this take a long time to write and put through that publishing process?
Oh, for sure. I think it was about a 6 years process of writing it, editing it, finding different pastors and other people to read it, just kind of get their thoughts on it. And then, of course, really putting it together to a publisher and going through their editing process. It was a long process, but I'm really glad that I did it. I really believe this is a message that God really wanted to get out there through me.
Yeah, once you handed your manuscript off to Christian Faith Publishing and you got that ball rolling, what did you find the most challenging part of that publishing process?
Probably the waiting, because, they would read it over, make their suggestions, and then I would make my suggestions, kind of going back and forth, and then waiting for them to do the cover design. That was a long process in of itself, but I had to wait and kind of trust God that it was all in his hands for his timing. Then I was very impressed with the finished product when it came out this past October.
What's it like then whenever you get that finished product, you're finally holding the book in your hands for the first time? What's that moment like, Dave?
Oh, felt like God had really accomplished something through me. And that finally, I was at this next step of getting the word out there. Hey, this book is published. People could buy it, read it. And I'm really looking forward to, just seeing what God will do. Maybe start a few prayer movements around the world.
So looking ahead, do you think you would write and publish more in the future?
Yes, I'm looking at, writing some stories. Right before we did this interview, I was kind of working through one as I was waiting to start this interview with you. And then, I have a friend who's already bought the book and has read it. Is suggesting that I write kind of a sequel to Fueling God's Mission with Prayer. And I'm also in the process of putting together a discussion guide for it, too. So, I definitely do want to write more and just really helping people connect with Jesus and to his mission.
So this can be quite the learning experience, doing all of this, getting your work published. So is there anything that you might be able to throw out there in the way of advice for the aspiring authors who are listening to us?
Yeah, I just say pray, follow God, lead in it, write with him. It's just a lot of times that prayer is about spending time with God, talking to him, listening to him. If you really believe that God has put a message or a book on your heart or a story that's going to inspire people, just write it with God and, just allow him to lead the process and lead you. Yeah, allow him to be the pilot or the writer as opposed to being the co-writer with you.
I think this book is going to inspire and motivate so many people. Again, the title is Fueling God's Mission with Prayer. It's written by Dave, the prayer guy, Roderick, and published by Christian Faith Publishing, so really you can find it everywhere, like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also at traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Dave, it's been so wonderful talking with you tonight, learning about Fueling God's Mission with Prayer. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
I'm really happy to welcome back to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, author Sid Spurgeon. Sid, welcome back. It's really great to be talking with you again.
Thank you. In fact, I was just thinking when I found I was going to talk to you, I said, I want to make good on a mistake I made the last time I talked to you. So we'll take care of that.
Well, congratulations, your new book, The Grandmother We Never Met. It's in stores now. So, Sid, can you tell me all about The Grandmother We Never Met and what readers are going to get into here?
Well, I'm not sure what kind of readership we're looking at. Probably people that just would like to hear sort of a moving story. Moving meaning emotionally moving. I wrote a long story for my 4 kids called The Grandmother You Never Met, and mostly because they never met their grandmother. I was 17 when she died, and obviously, they weren't around then. So I wrote it for them, just to kind of acquaint them with their grandmother, and that was my main purpose.
Did this take you a long time to write and get through the publishing and everything?
Good question. No. In fact, when I decided to write it, it went pretty fast. Then I just put it down, and I just made copies for my kids, and I didn't think much else about it. But my wife read it, and she can't read it without just breaking down every dang time she reads it. It's really an emotional book. And she said, you need to send that to a publisher to see what happens. So there we are.
I'm looking at the cover right now. This is a beautiful book. So was it difficult to figure out what goes on the cover of this one?
No, that's another good one. You're asking the right questions. It was not. That cover, I mentioned it in the book. That is my mom and I, and it was about a month before she died. I escorted her around the high school where I was going to high school because she just was going to parent-teacher conferences regardless of how bad she felt that she was going to go. So that's me escorting her around Pendleton High School on the cover. Yeah, my wife read that and cried for a month.
When you held this thing for the first time, was that an emotional moment for you?
Oh, man. Yeah, the whole thing. I was telling a friend of mine not too long ago, I said, I'd have to stop every half an hour when I was writing that book and clear my eyes. And they're all good memories. And it was a happy time. I wasn't all sad or anything like that. I felt real good. But it was just a wonderful thing for me to do. I mean, I'm really glad that I did.
Was there anything particularly challenging this time when it comes to the publishing and everything?
No, that went well. The challenge, and I wrote it a couple times in the book, I said, I don't have my whole memory anymore, which is true. And I said, I'll do my best to make sure that what I get down here is correct. It's not some memory that I just dreamed up or anything like that. And that was hard. Surprisingly, I remember very few conversations. And that's really too bad because we had some wonderful conversations. But, I can't remember them word for word, I guess, is the problem.
And when you are writing, are you the kind of author that maybe has a routine to it? Like maybe you're an early morning writer, late night writer, or you're the kind of writer that just sort of writes whenever you can find that time?
No, I'm retired. I'm a retired high school teacher. So I've got time, and I have mornings, and I just get up early in the morning. And that's kind of what I do my writing is then. And then unless, of course, I just get some hair-raising idea that I can't wait to get down, I'll put it down right away. But that's kind of the way it works for me.
Any hair-raising ideas you have now, maybe, for a future book?
Yeah, I'm writing a sequel to a book that I had published recently. It's called Hard Times, Good People. It's about the Depression and things like that. Well, anyway, I'm writing a sequel to that right now. And I'm probably more than halfway done with it, and I'm having a good time doing it.
Again, the title is The Grandmother We Never Met. This is written by Sid Spurgeon and published by Hawes & Jenkins Publishing. So find it at Amazon, find it at Barnes & Noble, find it at iTunes, and also right down the street at your local bookshop. Sid, as always, it's great talking with you. Thanks again.
Great talking to you. Hope we can do it again sometime.
Sitting down right here with me now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, I'm really happy to be joined by author Drew Worthen. Drew, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
Well, I wanted to congratulate you, Drew. You have a new book out. It's titled Cherubim and Seraphim, Heaven's Beasts and Other Assorted Beings, Events, and Places Associated with Them. Drew, can you tell me all about this?
Yeah, well, simply put, kind of an overview, it's about two misunderstood creatures in both Old and New Testaments, of course, the cherubim and the seraphim, who play a role in the kingdom of God. Now, the thing is, they're not angels, as many contend. They're a separate class of creatures that are arguably not two distinct creatures called cherubim and seraphim, but they're really one class of creature with two different roles as defined by Scripture. And so the names cherubim and seraphim identify their function, not just their natures. But, that's only part of what the book is about. As you mentioned, the subtitle is Heaven's Beasts and Other Assorted Beings, Events, and Places Associated with Them. And, of course, the topics range from the first introduction of the cherubim in the book of Genesis, where I delve into how they played a role in protecting the tree of life from Adam and Eve and their descendants, to how the Garden of Eden is actually displayed in God's blueprint for the temple that was delivered to Moses, and, of course, why that matters. And then I connect that to the final culmination of God's temple that is revealed in the book of Revelation as the new heavens and the new earth. And of course, we can dive into other particulars as we move through this conversation.
This is really interesting. Drew, what gave you the idea to get into the cherubim and seraphim and write the book?
Basically, I was studying through the book of Ezekiel at the time. And, I was interested in wanting to know more about them. Of course, it's like anything else. Sometimes we will come upon a passage of Scripture and we get a preconceived notion as to what it is. When I was doing a Bible study at the time through Ezekiel with a number of people, and I was interested in what these creatures actually were, because basically you've got an understanding by most people that they're angels. But the deeper I dug into it, the more I learned that I had to put my own traditions and preconceived notions to the side and come to find out that they are not angels. They're, like I say, an entirely different class of creature. So I decided to kind of do some more studying on that. I didn't intend to write a book. I was just curious. But it took almost 8 years to put this book together. And the reason for that is because the subject of cherubim and seraphim isn't that difficult to research. But every time I turned a corner, these two creatures were bumping into everything else I mentioned in the subtitle, whether they're events, places, and other things. And so I had to kind of go down some other rabbit holes to find out what that was. And it took time to do it. And, of course, I was working at the time as well. And so it wasn't as I could devote full time to it.
So what sort of a reading audience did you have in mind? Would it be for general believers, do you think?
I think it would be for general believers. It's a book that kind of goes into a lot of detail, and I think there's a tendency for some folks to think that when they come to a passage of Scripture, for example, that, there's a tendency these days, I think, to kind of view that passage as to how it makes me feel instead of what it actually says. And so the book, the way it's set out, it really goes into much more detail, and it gives the reader an opportunity to find out how to study the Word of God. That's one of the things I do in the book, is kind of bring that to light, but also to flesh out what the actual text is saying. And so you have to deal with the Word of God in a way where you're exegeting the passages with a proper hermeneutic so that you're arriving at the intended meaning that the original author was trying to put forth. And so every subject in the book is dealt with that way. No, so as long as someone's, interested in wanting to dig deeper into the Word and they're interested in coming to a book that helps them do that, I think this would be a great book for any believer who is falling into that category.
Well, you've already had some good bits of advice throughout. Is there anything else that you might have for the aspiring authors who are listening right now to us?
It does require patience. Again, these are the things that if the Christian author, for example, in particular, is hoping to produce a bestseller with all the perks that go along with that, I would simply caution anyone. They should have realistic expectations and be willing, like I say, to invest in their own book, whether they make money or not. Again, taking pleasure in knowing that what they wrote is sometimes the best and only reward.
Again, the book is titled Cherubim and Seraphim, Heaven's Beasts and Other Assorted Beings, Events, and Places Associated with Them. This is written by Drew Worthen and published by Covenant Books, so really you can get it everywhere. Check it out at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes or also right down the street at your local bookshop. Drew, it's been really great talking with you tonight. Thanks again for joining me.
Hey, thanks you. I appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. We hope to see you back here every Friday night at 8 p.m. or listen anytime via podcast at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, to name just a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.